Hey, and welcome into the Big Ten Huddle. I'm your host, JR. I've got a lot to talk about going on in the Big Ten. This is less of our news and kind of big topic episode. It is an episode with Big Jeff, Big Jeff's football insights. We told you this was going to be coming. It's here. We're happy to do it. It is during NCAA tournament games right now, but if you're somebody who you're not really much of a basketball fan, you just want the football, this is the kind of episode that's for you. Or you're listening after the fact because you just watched a whole lot of basketball yesterday and you just need a break. We're here for you. So we got Big Jeff from Big Jeff Football here with us to talk about our subject, which is grading the coaches in the Big Ten using the 2025 season. I'm going to let Jeff explain it a little bit more, introduce himself if you haven't heard him yet, and then we'll get started. Jeff, take it away.
Yeah, thanks, JR. And I've been on a couple podcasts with JR. It's been a few weeks, though. And the plan here is for me to join him on Thursday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern time. It'll be most Thursday nights. Calling this Big Jeff's Football Insights on the Big Ten Huddle. So I am 100% focused on Big Ten football. I do watch some basketball as well, but I spend most of my time paying attention to what's happening in the Big Ten from a football perspective. It's 365 days a year, as you guys know. So the name Football Insights. So insights in the name implies that I'm going to leverage data to support some of these topics I have. So a little pet peeve of mine is, I listen to opinions and everything, and often they're based on just pure perceptions. And sometimes a little bit of data analysis can cause you to it can contradict that perception, or sometimes it supports that perception, right? But to me, it's like, what does the data say? And I'm not saying the data is the be all end all, but it really can help lead you to better insights. So that's the plan, is to bring you different topics where we say, what does the data tell us? And then we still interpret and debate that, right? So I'm going to cover topics, and then JR is going to jump in and add his commentary. He'll be like the kind of like the John Madden to my leading the charge here. So just a little more.
Those are big shoes to fill there, Jeff. I don't know. You're Big Jeff. I don't know if I can have those big shoes.
John Madden, though. I mean, JR is going down the path of being the next John Madden, by the way.
Hey, there we go. I'll be the John Madden of Big Ten football. I'll do it.
We'll take that anytime. So just about me. So I'm 57 years old, retired from UPS. I worked in marketing for years. I'm a 1986 or 1990 graduate, I should say, of Indiana University. It's not the University of Indiana, as some of our basketball players still say. Malik Renew, as you entered the portal, and then you called us the wrong university that you resided in for 3 years. But I'm also a longtime Ohio State football fan. So what's nice about that, I could tell you, I had a well-rounded, objective mindset, and I have a perspective of a team, Indiana, that typically is on the bottom of the barrel when it comes to Big Ten performance in football, and Ohio State, who's the best. So I get both ends, and there's hope for no matter where you come from in this new era that the Big Ten is under. The Big Ten has a lot of power, so there's hope for every single team in the Big Ten, and I'm very much a glass half full guy, and I hope to bring that to you. The other thing is I live in Atlanta, so I'm the heart of SEC country. I call it the ground zero of college football. As you all know, the SEC and the Big Ten were the two conferences vying for supremacy, right, in college football. So I can kind of bring you that perspective. Every day, whether I go down to the pool or play tennis, I run into my SEC buddies, and we like to talk about it. So I think that will be a benefit, kind of comparing to the SEC. And then finally, have two boys, 16 and 19. They both played football. My youngest son is on the football team. He plays lacrosse. I've coached many of their teams. So I kind of more have a coach's mindset than a media mindset, to be honest. And I'm also a competitive athlete from a tennis perspective. So again, all that's kind of the background. And finally, been running my own website focused on Big Ten football. It's called bigjeffsfootball.com. I'll mention this many times. Have many good articles there going back to August. When I do a podcast topic, I'm typically going to create an article that goes on bigjeffsfootball.com. And in this case, there's a supporting article for this topic that's been out there for about 2 weeks now. And then finally follow me on Big Jeff's FT Ball on X as well. All right. So with that, let's get into our topic here. It's grading Big Ten football coaches entering 2025. What do the numbers say?
Oh, Jeff, if you don't mind, really fast, let's see who's here in the comment section really fast, and then we'll get
Absolutely.
into it. How about that? All right, we got John here. Good evening, gentlemen. Hope you're enjoying your night. John, hope you are as well. I know you're loving the basketball. Said you're gonna watch both. We appreciate that, John. Being here and also getting to watch some ball. That's what I'm gonna be doing as well. I got basketball here on my second screen over here, watching Kansas and Arkansas right now. So Pitt Snipe Husker. I think JR got a haircut. Very slick, very Ron Burgundy. Man, I am just getting the compliments tonight,
When in
man. John
Rome,
Madden, Ron
when in Rome.
Burgundy. And Husker says, I just finished my 60th season on Madden '08 last night. Kind of sad. Wow, that is crazy. 60th season. Pretty insane there. Cheers to you there, Husker. And Billy here. Billy saying here, Billy, we appreciate you being here. All right, we got a number of people here with us. Jeff, let's get into the Big Ten coaches' grades here.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say, the opinions on college football is really very widely. Think of a James Franklin. I read, he's a really good coach, or he's the most overrated coach there is out there, right? USC's Lincoln Riley, great at Oklahoma, but has struggled at USC so far. So who is he? Is he the great coach he was at Oklahoma? Something in between? Does he just need more time at SC? And then Wisconsin's Luke Fickell, 3 years ago, he was the A+ best hire of the hiring cycle 3 years ago. It was a home run, right? He's gone under 500 in his 2 years with the Badgers. So emotions and perception of coaches' personalities dictate how fans view a coach. So what do the numbers say, right? So I'm going to grade and discuss all the Big Ten coaches for all 18 teams in their current jobs only. So this ranking, let me repeat, is for how they've done in their current Big Ten job only, right? What do the numbers say? A key stat here I'm going to focus on is emphasis on Big Ten conference game results versus recent history. So how have they done in Big Ten conference games versus recent history? Because if you consider out of conference, that's where you start to get into how easy people's schedules are, which really vary quite a bit. I'm still going to talk about their overall record, but Big Ten conference results matters more. So just as an example, Lincoln Riley that's on this list here, he's in the middle section kind of. You can see, for those who are watching, you're going to see the list here of the actual grades, and he's rated a C-. For those who aren't watching and just like to listen, I'm still going to walk you through so you'll be able to follow this information without seeing this chart very well. But Lincoln Riley, based on 3 years, he has a 26-14 overall record for USC, 17-10 in the Big Ten, right? And then he's 81-24 overall for his career D1 record. I'm going to, for each one of these coaches, importantly, compare their conference record versus the prior 5 years for their team within conference, how they performed, and then the prior 15 years. So the reason for that is that it's not really an even playing field when you think about evaluating college coaches versus NFL coaches. NFL, it's supposed to be about parity. So you can you can compare apples to apples with how coaches do in their record, and it would be a good comparison. That's not the case in college football. Ohio State or Michigan, they have so much more inherent advantages. You can't just take their record and compare it to Indiana's record, right? Because Indiana is a much harder position. They don't have the capabilities, if you will, the history that the Blue Bloods have. So it's very hard to compare the two. And so my way around that was to say, what's their record versus the prior 5 years and 15 years? That's kind of like the gist of it. And I also didn't want to overanalyze this, right? I could have added in records versus rivals, trying to keep it fairly simple and yet make it data based.
So you're kind of using the past 5 years and 15 years as kind of like what the expectation is, and if they meet, exceed, or do not, meet the expectation there. Is that kind of what you're saying?
That is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And that is probably the most important part. That's not the only thing. I like to consider their Big Ten, their bowl record on end of the job that they have. That's important, right? Their overall record does matter. Um, and then whether they win a conference championship and a natty, that should be factored in, right? But it's not, I didn't put that into a formula. But in general, their record versus the prior 5 and 15 years is really driving this the most. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So how we're going to do this, folks, is there's really 4 different levels that we have here. We have your A grade coaches, your B grade coaches, C grade, and then D and F. I'm going to go through the A's first. I'm going to go through all of them. We'll stop and let JR comment, and then maybe take a few listener questions. Go through the B, C's, and D's, and that's how we'll do it. We'll do it in 4 sections. And that way we'll make sure this doesn't take too long, right? The other thing I wanted to say is Barry Odom, who's last on the list here, I'm really not going to rank him, right? He's in his first year. He has no record. I could tell you he has a 45 and 33 career record. That's a 58% winning percentage. So that's pretty good. And then the comps for Purdue, the last 5 years, they've won 40% of their games in the Big Ten. Prior 15 years, they've run 33% of their games. So the bar is not really high for Barry Odom, right? He's come into a situation where Purdue has not been very successful recently. And so what's interesting about this data too, it should level set what your expectations might be, right? Based on the recent past. All right. So with that, JR, we're going to go into the A grade coaches. Like I said, I'm going to cover these first 4, JR, and then let you kind of like say what you maybe liked about it, didn't like about it, disagree with, etc. So yeah. So the first coach is Indiana's Curt Cignetti. Ohio State's Ryan Day is in this group, Oregon's Dan Lanning, and Illinois' Brett Bielema. So Indiana's Curt Cignetti, he's the only one with an A+ grade. He actually got the highest grade. So right now he's the king of Big Ten coaches, right? I'm not saying he's the best coach, to be clear, in the Big Ten. I am saying through his 1 year versus all the other coaches' current performance in their job, he's done the best job relative to, prior performance and just overall what he's done on the job, right? So for Indiana, with the exception of brief periods of winning, they've basically been the worst team in the Big Ten when it comes to performance. The numbers bear that out. Historically, they're the all-time losingest program in Division I history, right? And so going 8-1 in conference, which Cignetti did, that's an 89% win rate. He made it to the 12-team college playoff, right? He went 11-2 in overall. And if you look at that 89% win rate, I know it's 1 year, but that's all we have. The prior 5 years, you're looking at a 33% win rate for Indiana. 14-29 they went. The prior 15 years in conference, Indiana won 25% of the time. That is easily, actually not easily. It beats out Illinois by a little bit as the worst winning percentage over that 15 years in the Big Ten. So him coming in and going 8-1, and I know they had an easy schedule, right? But you still have to play the schedule you're given. And they had the highest amount of a winning margin of any team also. So easy schedule, but they're beating the pants off of people, right? And so for that reason, Curt Cignetti gets an A+. It's a 1 year sample size. So if he does poorly, these numbers could flip tremendously, right, in 1 year. But based on this, he's number 1 in the Big Ten. All right, let's go to number 2, Ohio State's Ryan Day. So we know the story on Ryan Day, right? Some wanted him fired after the upset loss to Michigan, right? He goes from that to winning the national championship. And by all counts, based on that and the data, Ryan Day deserves an A. So he gets an A. His conference winning percent is 90%. He's gone 47-5 over 6 years. 4 of the 5 losses have been to Michigan, right? So that's been the bugaboo for him. The 1 point Oregon loss is the only other loss he's had outside of Michigan. That's incredible. Just incredible performance. He's 47-1 against the rest of the Big Ten beyond Michigan. And the other thing is his comps are tough. He took over for Urban Meyer, and Urban Meyer, as you all know, did amazing at Ohio State. So he actually has a 5 percentage point better mark than Urban Meyer, than the prior 15 years at Ohio State. So not all that 15 years included Urban Meyer, but it also included some of the Jim Tressel era. It did include the 1 year of Luke Fickell that was like 6-6 or something like that, right, JR? But really 5% better mark than the majority of Urban Meyer era versus the last 5 years, which was directly on the Urban Meyer era, same winnings percentage. Urban Meyer was 37-4 in conference in his 5 years before Fickell took over. So that's just any way you slice it. He won the national title, right? He has a 70-10 overall record. That's 88% overall win rank. That ranks third all time among Division I coaches with at least 75 games. Only Newt Rockne and Walter Camp, who are legends, have better records than Ryan Day, right? And then the fact he won a natty. Now, I published this and post something on Reddit, and some guy said, "Are you crazy? How does Ryan Day not get an A+ because he just won the national title?" You can make that argument, actually, right? I mean, I think it depends on how you view the Michigan losses. I think some Ohio State fans might say he gets an A- to me, right? Even winning the national title. So I'm not saying these rankings are perfect, but I think it's clear he's in the A category for sure. All right, number 3, we're going to go Oregon's Dan Lanning. All right, I give him an A just so you know. I mean, could a team have any better regular season in a new conference than Oregon's Dan Lanning had, right? The Ducks came in and they mostly dominated the Big Ten. They won an unbeaten 13-0 after beating Penn State in the championship game. He completed his third season in Eugene and has gone 24-4 overall. And so, by the way, I decided in the cases for the Pac-10 coaches coming in to include their Pac-10 record. So we're saying he's 3 years, right, into this job, which he is at Oregon, right? So that's fair. So he's 24-4, 2 years in the Pac-12, 1 year in the Big Ten. That's an 86% win rate. So that's really second best actually third best to Ryan Day and Curt Cignetti. This rate is 20% point rate better than the prior 5 years at Oregon. So that 86% is 20 points better than the 66% winning rate in the 5 prior years of the coaches before Dan Lanning came on board. And then versus the prior 15 years, he's a 12% rate better. So this is the key metric, right? Oregon was winning at a really good clip, right? 73% over 15-year time period. That's really good. That would actually have ranked second in the Big Ten, even better than Michigan, right? They would be second to Ohio State when it comes to a winning percentage in conference. Now, the bugaboo for him, 2-1 in bowl games. And unfortunately, that includes the surprising blowout 41-21 loss to Ohio State, right? So I'd give him an A+ if it wasn't for that loss. I just have to quote downgrade him to an A, if you will. It was a sour way to end the season. But if you're an Oregon fan, you have to feel great about things. He's heading into year 4. And just to remind everyone, the 2 after this season, if you look at rankings of all college coaches, the 2 that are the top 2, Kirby Smart comes in number 1. Ryan Day comes in number 2 as the 2 top coaches in college football. They didn't win their first natties till their year 6 on the job. Lanning's entering year 4. He's on track, right? He is on track. And so thing looks good there. So he's my third one. And my final A grade level coach is Illinois' Brett Bielema. I give him an A as well. He just completed a surprisingly good season in his 4th year at Illinois. He went 6-3 in conference. He went 10-3 overall. And importantly for the Big Ten, a huge win over South Carolina in the Citrus Bowl, and he finished 20th in the final AP rankings. Next year, expectations super high for him. They return the majority of their starters. JR, I think it's like 19 of 22 starters or something in that realm.
I think they have 21 of their starters from their bowl game. It's like 19 from the season or something like that. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
very, very high up there.
very high up there. And if you look at the prognosticators, way too early top 20, top 25s, that Illinois is consistently there, right? Usually in the top 20. Some have them up as high as up to 10th. So Bielema stats, in fact, are second best in the Big Ten compared to Kurt Signetti. When you look at comparisons, his record, which is, by the way, through 4 seasons in the Big Ten, he's only 18-18 in conference. So that's a 50% win rate. But his comps are the prior 5 years tenure at Illinois is only a 30% win rate. In the prior 15 years, it was only a 27% win rate. So he was taking over a program that was really bad for a long time. Illinois for a while was, Illinois is on my schedule. That's a W, right? And so that's why he's getting a high comp here, even though he's only has a 500 record, but he's building, right? But it's 20% better win rate than the prior 5 and 23% better than the prior 15. He's 1-1 in bowl games, and then 28-22 for a 56% win rate overall. The other thing to highlight here, he has a 61% win rate overall. So that, of course, includes his time at Wisconsin. That's just something to keep in mind. He was 68-24 over 7 years at Wisconsin. That's a 74% win rate, and that included 2 Rose Bowl appearances. I'm not using that for that A ranking. Remember, we're talking about currently on the job, but I'm only saying that because Illinois fans, and the reason why a lot of people love the future of Illinois is just factoring in how well he did at a school like Wisconsin, which had really good resources, but not the kind that Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State has, right? And so he's my 4 of the 18 coaches with A rankings. With that, I'll stop. JR, give me your thoughts on the A grade coaches.
Yeah, I think you're on point here. I think Kirk Cinetti, the biggest thing with him, and I said it during the season. A lot of people knocked him for his schedule and said, well, these are teams you should be blowing out. And I told people, I said, well, yeah, Indiana was one of those teams a year ago. Now look what he's doing. Now he's winning games like Ohio State and Oregon and them do. Now in that Ohio State game, we saw that he still has some development to do for his program. It's really really hard to come in year one for Indiana like that, and on obviously the recruiting isn't the same place that it's at for Ohio State and Oregon right now. But I mean, just looking at Signetti and where he's at and the expectations of the program, it's an obvious A+. I was thinking like your Reddit friends were thinking, guy wins a national championship and he just gets an A, It's like
Fair, fair.
but
Yeah.
that is a part of the expectations at Ohio State. They expect to win national championships. Maybe the win total isn't as high as you might expect, but you are expected to win national championships. And I think in this new age of college football, like we could see this happen. We could see a Georgia go 9-3 and then win the national championship or something like that with the way things go. Dan Lanning, it's interesting, didn't win a postseason game because of the bye, and they played Ohio State in the very first one. He still gets an A. I don't know if that so much means that the expectations for Oregon are, substantially lower. I think it's just, you had a good season there your first year. You're also, have expectations for Dan Lanning, only his 3rd year in head coaching, so you have to take that into account. So I think he has a bright future ahead, and I think Oregon fans have a lot to be excited about with Dan Lanning. I've sang his praise a number of times on here. And then the Brett Bielema. I can't say I disagree at all with an A for him. I would have thought close to an A+. Maybe if they got one more win, I would have thought of maybe an A+ just because of where this program was, kind of like you were talking about. Obviously, it probably wouldn't have got them in maybe it would have got them closer to the playoffs. I don't think they would have got in at 10-2. But still, I mean, a 10-win season at Illinois, being able to do that. That's fantastic. And you take into account what he did at Wisconsin. He's just a really good coach, and he continues to show it year after year, in my opinion.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Okay. Should I jump into the B tranche here?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So we have 3 B grade coaches. We have Penn State's James Franklin, Minnesota's PJ Fleck, and Iowa's.
Oh, did we want to go through comments really fast? I apologize. I forgot to do that.
Yeah, we could take a. You want to take a couple?
Yeah, let's take a couple comments really fast. So, exploring with Ben and Sam. I think it may be the first time I've seen you guys in the chat. I apologize if it's not, but thanks for being here. Dan Lanning fans here says, "Yep, Lanning is an A by far. Riley is trash. Riley's not too much trash, right? He's C minus on here, but I think we'll get into him here in just a second. And our friend Jack on Bucks, he said absolutely correct. You have to judge a coach on how they perform versus the program standard. Absolutely, yeah. I think we're on the right track there. And then just a bunch of other comments with Bert and people like that. So yeah, I think we're good there. All right, go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, remember in my article, I have this table right in the article, so you can access it right off of bigjeffs.com. So, all right. So the 3 B-level coaches, the first one's James Franklin. So now that Ryan Day has won a national title, I think James Franklin has taken over as the coach with the most varied opinion on their coaching acumen. Coming into the year last year, I think Ryan Day had people saying, well, yeah, he's definitely a good coach, but how good is he really, right? In big games, he can't win them. He can't beat Michigan. Well, he proved that, right? He went 4-0 in big games. So now it's on James Franklin. He takes the mantle from Ryan Day. And he's often listed on the most overrated coach list. So I do think he's a good coach for sure. I think he's on the brink of being considered great, but he's got to get it done, right? So he is 64-33 in conference games. He's completed his 11th year at Penn State. That's scary. He's actually the second most tenured coach in the Big Ten. So 66% conference win rate. That's 4th best among the current Big Ten coaches. That's pretty good. Compared to the 5-year prior win rate, he's 1% point better. So the prior 5 years, it was a 65% win rate. So 1% better. And then the prior 15 years was just a 58% win rate. And that included some of the, the sanctions that they had and some of the things which really did impact the program. It pulled down those results, but he's 8% better than the prior 15 years. So that's pretty good overall, right? His career win percent is 69%. That's overall. That includes his time at Vanderbilt. He has a 71% win rate overall for Penn State. So 101-42. He's 6-6 in bowl games. So that's good, but not great, right? You see a lot of good here and then kind of good, but not great, right? You like it, but you want to see more is kind of what you get out of it. I do think the 66 Big Ten win rate, it feels like it should be better. I gave him the B+ grade. You could convince me maybe he deserves a B grade, right? Given it is Penn State. They're supposed to be a blue blood. These stats here kind of show they're a low-level blue blood. So I'm going to still stick with the B+. The bottom line and what my numbers don't show and why you could bring him down is what would it be his record be in big games, right? And that's where he's failed. So, 1-15 record versus top 5 opponents, 4-20 record versus top 10 teams, and then 15-29 versus top 25 teams. His record against Michigan and Ohio State is 4-17, including just 1 win coming against Ohio State. So from a big game perspective, I mean, he's C or D level for sure, right? But the good thing is he has a really talented group coming back this year. He has a chance to totally change perceptions of him as a big game coach, just like Ryan Day did this past year. It can happen. I'm not sure if it will, but he's capable and he's got the roster to do it. Next up, Minnesota's PJ Fleck. And so along with Franklin, this is another coach
There
really
is a
widely.
typo you got there. It's you got
Oh,
TJ Fleck instead.
yeah, PJ. I did this too. Yeah, TJ, PJ. My bad. PJ Flag. Thank you. Need to make that change.
That's all right.
But
That's
widely
all right.
varying opinion on PJ. I know JR, you're one probably that it's kind of hit
I'm
or
high
hit
on
and miss.
PJ. I'm high
Yeah.
on PJ.
Okay. Okay. 34 and 36 record in the Big Ten over his 8 years. So that's a 49% win rate, right? He's the third longest tenured coach of any Big Ten coach. But that win rate is actually 5 percentage points better than the prior 5 years before he came aboard. And then the prior 15 years before PJ came along, Minnesota was winning at a 38% rate. That's pretty bad, right? So he's 500 or so, but really pulling up Minnesota compared to recent history. Minnesota probably doesn't have huge NIL funding and things like that. So actually, that's pretty good. He also is raised by his 6-0 overall bowl record. I mean, that's impressive no matter how you slice it, right? 6-0s, and then a 60% win rate at Minnesota overall. He has a 59% win rate when you factor in his time in the MAC. And I would just say, when you think about him, Minnesota is rarely in the top half of the Big Ten when it comes to recruiting. In fact, next week we're going to go into some historical Big Ten recruiting statistics. That's pretty interesting. They're never in the top half, and yet, he's good at developing players, consistently competitive every year. JR, I think I saw you put something up, an X post or something kind of on that topic of how for their pro day, they brought in a bunch of people. I'll let you talk to that when we get to you there. But he's definitely a developer. You can't argue he's not a good coach. He's definitely at least a good coach in my book. All right, next. Iowa's Kirk Ferentz. He's going to get a B minus. He's the last one in the B category. Longest tenured coach, 26 years in Iowa City. He took over for Hayden Fry. That's during my era. Hayden Fry was there for 20 years. So think about that. 46 years they've had two coaches. I mean, crazy stability there in Iowa City. It's also why they, don't like to change things a lot, right? So he's 128 and 89 in conference. So he's a 59% win rate. So how does that compare? So he's actually 10 percentage points better than the last 5 years of the Hayden Fry era. So last 5 years of Hayden Fry were winning at 49%. And then the prior 15 years of Hayden Fry, they were winning at 59%, the exact same amount. So long term, basically, Kirk Ferentz just continuing what Hayden Fry had, winning about 60% of games, right? Going 6-4 in the Big Ten, if you will, right? That's pretty good, though, right? That's good, but maybe not as good as Iowa fans would like to see. He's 10-11 in bowl games, so that's good but not great, right? But they've made a bowl in 21 of 26 years. Iowa's made a bowl. That's impressive. I mean, ask Wisconsin fans now that they're not in it. They want to get back to bowl, and there's many teams that haven't made bowls. Nebraska didn't make a bowl for 7 or 8 years in a row. 62% overall win rate. I just think it deserves a B minus. It still puts him 7th best among coaches. And so just to wrap up this section, so those really B and above, which I would call like good grades, right? To me, B is like, it's kind of like average. What did I have it labeled here? I called light green or B as good performance. I called deep green or A as very good or great. The light tan that are coming up, I'm calling poor or below average. And then the deep tan is going to be bad performance. So bottom line is 7 of the 18 coaches get at least good grade. Jared, comments on our B level coaches.
Yeah, I think James Franklin is interesting. B plus this year. I would have thought maybe at least an A minus, just because he did win a couple of playoff games. However, I know you're looking more kind of win total, and they did go to the Big Ten championship there as well. Put up a better fight against Penn State than I think some people would expect. And so I think, if you're
So,
looking
Jared,
beyond the numbers,
to
go,
clarify though, I'm ranking him in his tenure at Penn State. So
right,
not just this year, right?
right.
So while this year's performance definitely could lift him up, I still want to look across the entire performance just to be clear.
Yeah, for sure. I'm just talking about this year in
Yeah.
general.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, when you look at the entire tenure, I do think he gets a little bit of a knock for some of those records when you look at what he took over with kind of what Bill O'Brien gave him. Bill O'Brien did a good job, but also Bill O'Brien didn't leave him in this best spot. He had a number of walk-on offensive linemen and stuff like that in that situation. So his like top 25 records and stuff like that do suffer a bit from what he took over in that scenario. But even then, like you said, he is a blue blood. You've played Ohio State for so many years now. You would think you'd get more than one win against Ohio State. Yes, Ohio State has been dominant, but you would still think, what's he got? 3, 4 wins over Michigan?
He would have 3 wins over Michigan, 1 over Ohio State.
Yeah, 3 wins over Michigan. So, you would have think maybe a couple more, but that's kind of where Ohio State's program has been at, and it seems like when Penn State has had better teams a couple of times, they've been on the road, which I don't think has suited them well. But at the end of the day, you got to win those games if you're James Franklin. So I think some of those records definitely leave him outside the A portion, but he's teetering right there. He could definitely get into the A portion with one more good year, possibly winning a national championship this year with all the talent they have coming back. Yeah, PJ Fleck, I don't think people realize how bad Minnesota was before PJ Fleck took over. I mean, it wasn't like, 3-9 every single year, but, Jerry Kill had a couple of 8-win seasons in there. But I mean, for the most part, this was a team that was 500 pretty much every year. You wanted to be a bowl game type of team. In 2007, they only won one game that season. PJ took them in his third season from going 5-7 his first year to making them 11-2 his third year there. And since then, he has had 3 seasons of eight or more wins with a full football season. So, he did struggle last year, still won that bowl game against Bowling Green. But I think overall, when you take that into account, when you take the NFL development and stuff, it's just such a crazy stat to me. I've had to double, triple check it so many times, but for him to have 6 straight seasons, if Ariante Ursary gets drafted in the second round or the first round this year, for him to have 6 straight seasons of getting a player drafted in the first or second round, and the only teams with streaks higher than that are Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia, like that's just insane for a program like Minnesota. Now you could argue they've not performed well enough with that NBA talent on their roster. I could understand that a little bit, but at the same time, like I said, they won 11 games before COVID. After COVID, they won 2 9-win seasons right after that. I mean, this is not a pro. Yes, the past 2 years, especially last year, were not what you hope for. But we talked. I mean, Zach and I have talked so many times. One or two different plays from Minnesota, and this is a 9-win football team or a 10-win football team instead of an 8-win football team. So it's just kind of crazy the way it's went for them. And then Kirk Ferentz, yeah, I think Kirk Ferentz, it's hard to, have the grade change much when you've been there over 25 years, right? It's kind of like, at this point, the grade is what it is, unless there's a huge drop off or a huge, upgrade. Overall, I mean, longevity, everything going on there, the NFL talent and development for Kirk has been excellent as well. What he's able to do with some 3-star players and stuff like that, it's really impressive what he's been able to do. But this is just, I mean, this is kind of the Iowa program under Kirk Ferentz. They're going to be there. They're pretty much always going to have a good season. They're probably not going to be in the hunt for the Big Ten championship unless you have divisions and they're in the West and they win the West or anything like that. But overall, this is going to be a solid team, and you're not going to just automatically put a W next to their name when you're on your schedule. You think you probably will, right? If you're Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, you think you probably will, but it's not completely automatic year in and year out. So I think you're spot on with those. Maybe a little bit higher for Penn State, but I get what I get what the numbers and stuff like that where we're at.
Yeah, you definitely can make arguments here. It's for sure not saying this is the perfect statistics to use. So let's get into the C grade coaches, I call them. So we're going to cover Northwestern, Maryland, Michigan, USC, and Rutgers. Really, C, it's kind of saying, poor performance, not bad. And they're not, not saying they're bad coaches. One thing you're going to notice here is we get to these lower levels, the sample sizes get a lot smaller, right? So again, these grades are for their time in their current coaching job for their current Big Ten program. So first up, Northwestern's David Braun. So I give him a C. He had a surprisingly good start in his first year. He went 5-4 in conference, 8-5 overall. But that was followed by a kind of a clunker last year, right? He went 2-7 in conference last year. So over 2 years, he's 7-11. That's a 39% win rate. So if you compare that to the prior 5 years, it's actually 1% point lower than the 40% win rate from the prior 5 years, which would have been Pat Fitzgerald's tenure covering that. And then the prior 15 years, he's 9 percentage points lower just in conference than prior Northwestern coaches. So just that on that alone, he's not going to get a B or over, right? He did win his bowl game that in the first year, so he's 1-0 in bowl games. That's good. Overall, when you consider non-conference, he's 12-13. So higher academic standards, though, it is harder to win at Northwestern. They don't actually have a big NIL war chest. What's unique about Northwestern is despite, not having the resources, they've been really successful ever since Gary Barnett came on board. Not every year, but I was around in the 90s when Gary Barnett came in, high hopes and all that, and they went to the Rose Bowl with Pat Fitzgerald starting as a captain at middle linebacker for Barnett. And ever since then, they've found good coaches that understand Northwestern, how to win, identified formulas for success. Pat Fitzgerald did that. I do think with the demise of divisions, it is going to be tougher for Northwestern. They made 2 Big Ten championship games under Pat Fitzgerald. To be frank, that was from good coaching and being really lucky being in the Big Ten West, which was not very good. It just wasn't. So, and that's going to be a common thing here. Were you in the Big Ten West or not when evaluating some of these coaches here? Because it's a big deal. So I do think, it's too early to tell with David Braun. He gets a C here, not saying he'll remain there. This will be, he's pretty young guy. So kind of an open book here, but based on these numbers and my criteria, have to give him a C. Next up, another guy who's a favorite for people to talk about widely varying opinions, or maybe that's not widely. Maybe most people don't think he's very good. Mike Locksley, who gets a C. These numbers are really crazy here. So Locksley completed his 6th year. He's 15-35 in conference. That's a 35% win rate. Okay. Now, compared to the prior 5 years, coach, he has the same win rate. The prior 5-year tenure, which included DJ Durkin, but it was 30%. And compared to the prior 15 years, it is actually a little bit lower. He's 5 percentage points worse. So Maryland for the prior 15 years was at a 35% win rate. That's pretty damn bad. They were like 4th worst in the Big Ten over that time period. Maryland was. So 30% win rate is bad, but his comps aren't that bad. They're a little worse than prior coaches. To support him, though, he is 3-0 in bowl games. His overall record is 32-36. And I had to look this up because it freaked me out. His non-conference record, when you include bowl games, is 17-1. Think about that. He's 17-1 in non-conference games. Now, that's reflective of his non-conference games aren't very tough, right? Although they did beat like Virginia this past year as an example. They're not a slouch team.
They've been known to play like old ACC teams pretty much every year, right? They're not
Yeah.
playing Florida State in those kind of ones, but the ones that maybe aren't, top tier there. But yeah, you're right. Still 17-1. I mean, still impressive.
It's crazy. The one loss, I wrote it down. I had to look it up because I was like, this is not true. The only loss was September of 2019 to Temple. That was his only loss back in 2019. When
Was that when
everything
Matt
was,
Rule was there?
I don't know. I don't know. I didn't look that
I'll
up.
look it up. I'll look it up.
Good stump. Good stump. So here's the other reality too. Only a 30% win rate every year. He has to play Ohio State up until this past year, Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, and also for a while there, well, actually their 6 year, he caught the tail end in D'Antonio, maybe the tail end decent of it, D'Antonio, right? He had Mel Tucker come in for that really good year for Michigan State. I mean, it's been, if you're in the Big Ten East, it's brutal to have a good record, right? So no shame there, except for the fact that when you consider his overall record is a paltry 34% winning rate. He's 35-67. He coached 2 years at New Mexico and went 2-26. 2-26. That is dreadful. So Loxley's like this whole mix of like, how do you evaluate this guy, right? He actually recruits well. We'll show you that next week, but he doesn't really develop well, even though he does put out some NFL people. I think it's fair to say, though, now that they're out of the Big Ten East, we're going to find out in the next 2 years how good of a coach Mike Locksley is. And it will be a fair evaluation, given that he won't be playing the absolute brutal schedule that he's had recently. So he gets a C. Let's move on to Michigan's Sherrone Moore. This one's a toughie, right? Sample size of 1, true roller coaster ride. Went 8-5 overall, including an all-time great upset of Ohio State. I mean, they were like 20-point favorites. And then a huge bowl win over Alabama, right? Alabama did not play great in that game, but Michigan even had players who had opted out. It was an impressive win, no doubt about that. But earlier in the year, despite having potentially 5 first-round NFL draft picks this year, they were a middling 6-5 team after starting the year ranked in the top 10 coming off their national title.
8-5.
8-5. So, well, no, they were at the time 6-5.
Oh, sorry.
And
okay,
then,
sorry.
yeah, earlier in the year, and good point. And then they finished like amazing, right? They beat their rival all the time, and then beating Alabama, an SEC team. Anytime you beat that, that's gold, right? But the main culprit, they completely blew the management of their quarterback room after losing J.J. McCarthy to the NFL. So overall, Moore 5-4 conference record. That's a 56% win rate. You have to go off of that. I mean, versus the prior 5 years, it was an 81% win rate when Harbaugh had it going, right? The last 3 of the 5 years, especially. So 26 percentage points worse than Harbaugh did the prior 5 years. Versus the prior 15 years, it's 14% worse, right? Michigan, the prior 15 years was 69% winning rate. So, you could make an argument he gets a D here. I'm going to give him some slack because beating Ohio State and everything, I'll give him a C-. But the bottom line is you can't judge a guy for 1 year. We have no idea if Moore is a good or bad coach. We just don't. But the numbers say C-. All right, Lincoln Riley.
I do think it's going to be very intriguing to see who is, kind of doing better at their program in the next 3 years, Kirk Cignetti or Sherrone Moore. That's going to be very intriguing to me.
Yeah, good point. And it needs to be relative, right? Because like in the Indiana people know if they go 8-4, Indiana fans will be happy. Indiana fans are not expecting another let's make a playoff run, right? That would just be, we would be giddy again, right? So relative expectations, right? But very interesting to see what Sherrone Moore does. So Lincoln Riley, again, like Fickle, he was the home run hire of the 2022 cycle. That was the year before Fickle. So he's been 3 years on the job. He got off to a great start. He went 8-1 in the Pac-12 his first year. He was 11-3 overall that year, damn close to making the playoffs, right? Came down to near the end there. riding the coattails of a Heisman winner, Caleb Williams, of course. But he's 15-11 the past 2 years. So a 3-year conference record of 17-10. That's a 63% win rate. It's actually 3 percentage points lower than the prior 5 years, right? And the prior 5 years got Mike Riley fired and everything else. And then versus the prior 15 years, he's 5% lower. That's not good. That's not good for USC. And it's his comps were reasonable, right? Because the coaches before Lincoln Riley were not doing that great. So really that speaks pretty poorly to him. But he is 2-1 in bowl games. He is 26-14 overall. So it's a 65% win rate. So really, I'm calling underwhelming. I'm giving him a C minus. I do want to remind everyone, though, at Oklahoma, he had it rolling. He went 81-24. He had a 77% win rate. They went 55-10 over his 5 years. His win rate overall is still 77%, but at Oklahoma, he went 55-10 over 5 years. He never lost more than 2 games in a season. In fact, he had 2 losses all 5 seasons, including 2 playoff appearances where he lost round 1 and got that second loss. But all 5 years, they finished AP top 10 at Oklahoma. The guy can coach, right? So, but he's made mistakes too. He gets stubborn with his, wanting to pass the ball. And last year he had a pretty good running game, and he refused to lean into it. But I still think there's good potential for USC for sure. We're not going to get in here tonight, but structural change, coaching change, I'm sure JR has covered it. Made some real good hires and support staff and kind of like people that are specialized on making sure getting that recruiting in order. And really, they're seeing better results from that. I mean, their recruiting for next year is right now top 5. Some have them top 3 even. Future as well. But right now, based on the numbers, he gets a C minus. And our final C level coach, Greg Schiano, more crazy stats here. So he completed his 5th season, but this is his second tenure for Rutgers. I'm only grading here his 5 years in the current tenure, to be clear. He's 13-32 in conference in the 5 years, 29% win rate, right? Now, we talked about that. It is in the Big Ten West here, right? Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State every year. That needs to be factored. But the reality is we can only go by the numbers. That's what's crazy here versus the prior 5 years. That's a 20% better win rate. Believe it or not, prior 5 years, Rutgers was 4-40 in conference. And that included the 3-year reign of Chris Ash, where he went 3-25 in the Big Ten. So the comps for that looked good. But prior to the 15-year rate for Rutgers, Schiano is 6 percentage points worse. So really hard to get your hands around this, other than to say Rutgers has had some really big coaches recently. But it's pretty disappointing still, that 29% win rate, and why I'm giving him a C minus. He is 1-1 overall in bowl games. He's 26-34 overall at Rutgers for a 43% win rate. And again, being in the Big West as coach, I think he's a good coach. I think he's a good fit. Moving forward for Rutgers, it's going to depend on what the schedule looks like, right? This past year, the disappointing thing, he had one of the easiest schedules in the Big Ten. So it's pretty disappointing. I know they made a bowl game, but some were thinking 8-win season, maybe 9, and it didn't happen. He gets a C minus. JR, that's my C coaches. What's your comments?
Yeah, we'll just start with Greg Schiano there, since that's the last one you talked about. It's interesting with Schiano because you're right, he did play in the East, and we do need to think about that. However, this last year, it's really hard to gauge this last year just because of the injuries and everything else. But at the same time, if you're a coach, you need to be prepared for getting injuries and stuff like that on your team. So I I think C minus is a little low for him in his career, but in my mind, I'm probably still factoring in what he was at Rutgers before these 5 years as well. So I can see, maybe some below expectations there a little bit, especially when you factor in this last season too. Lincoln Riley, I mean, he started off so well, things went so well. Then the year, 2 years ago, that didn't go as expected. This year in the Big Ten didn't go as expected. I felt like he should have stuck with Miller Moss. I don't like that he moved on to Jada Maava. Not because I don't like Maava. I thought that was a bad decision. Now, obviously, there could be stuff going on behind the scenes we don't see, but I felt like that was a bad decision on his part this past year. And you know what? I don't think I can grade a guy C minus, Jeff, who's been in the Big Ten and never lost to an SEC team. He's like B minus or more for me. Okay.
Give him an A, man.
Right. I'm kidding, but I do think it's interesting that Lincoln Riley, hasn't had the most success in the Big Ten and struggled 2 years ago, but he was able to beat two SEC teams this last year. That's really really interesting. Sharon Moore, I people know my thoughts on Sharon Moore. I think he should have done better with the talent that he had. I think he royally screwed up his quarterback position this last year. For me, like you were the offensive coordinator. You knew what you had at quarterback. You should have known. You should have went to the transfer portal and got somebody. I do think that there does need to be some understanding because of how late Jim Harbaugh left, and they were in it with Talia Tagovailoa, so maybe that would have worked out for him if he had gotten his tag there. But still, I mean, and Sharon Moore did walk into a tough situation with having to basically rehire his entire staff while also looking at the transfer portal and stuff. So it was a difficult situation for him. But still, I look at that D line, Colson Loveland, Will Johnson. Like I look at all the talent they had, and all you had to do was kind of amass some guys around that. So I think it's going to be really interesting looking forward with Sharon Moore. What does he do without those guys? Does the development continue? Rayshon Benny seems to be on a good track. Their defensive tackle. They have Bryce Underwood coming in. Obviously, I think Sharon Moore did a really good job with his offensive coordinator hire and Chip Lindsey. So we'll see. We'll see how that goes. Mike Loxley's the one for me, Jeff. I mean, we, me and Jeff, me and Zach have made it known we are not big, Mike Loxley fans on this podcast, and I see your numbers, and I agree. Numbers wise, he is a C. But I just look at that area that he has to recruit from. I look at what he could have developmental wise. I look at the number of players he's put into the NFL draft, and I say he should be better than that. And yes, we can talk about the East that he was in and everything. What's he do his first year coming out of the East though? He wins one game in the Big Ten, one game, and I'm like, Mike Loxley. So he went from improving his you know, record year after year after year, and then this year just complete downfall. Only one win in the Big Ten, just kind of crazy. And then I think you got it exactly right there on David Braun. He clearly exceeds expectations his first year. 8 wins when they should have only won one. And then this past year, I think people were expecting a bowl game. He doesn't get very close to a bowl game. They kind of get a little bit walked over this season. He has a lot to figure out with his staff, but I like the way they're going with Preston Stone and stuff like that.
Okay, good stuff. All right, should I go into D and F, and then maybe we will open up at the end if we had time?
Yeah. Maybe go a little rapid fire here. We're close to an hour, so yeah. Well, let's go a little rapid fire with the Rule, Fish, Smith,
Yeah.
Foster, and Fickle.
Yeah, we will go faster because this group here, the DNF range, but every one of them is either first year, completed a first year, or their second year. Extremely small sample sizes, right? So we don't want to get out of hand here. But Matt Rule is first. I give him a D plus. He's 6-12 conference in the Big Ten. That's 33% win rate. That's 4 percentage points better than his predecessor Scott Frost, but still, that's a 37%, a 30% win rate you're comparing it to. So yeah, it's better, and then versus the prior 15 years in which we all know Nebraska's been underperforming, it's minus 17%, right? So for 2 years, it doesn't look great, right? He did go to a bowl game, though, for the first time in 7 years, was it? So he's 1-0 in bowls, 12-13 overall. I still think he can be a good coach. He's got a quarterback that should make the jump in his second year, but just based on those numbers, it's a D plus for Rule so far. Next up is Washington's Jed Fish. He went 4-5 in conference in year one. That's a 44% win rate. So let's face it here. We're comparing him to the prior 5 years that included Kalen DeBoer and their success that they built up to last year, where he had a 5th year or 6th year senior quarterback, really, in Michael Penix. He had a ton of great starters, the majority that were moved on to the NFL or transferred out. So he basically had to start from scratch. So really the comps are tough, right? Versus the prior 5 years, which is 21 percentage points lower, and versus the prior 15 years at Washington, he's 17 percentage points lower. So really tough comps for him. So you got to give him a D, right? Just based on those numbers. He did lose his bowl game as well, right? But too early to really make a judgment on Fish, and some good things are happening for sure. Has a very promising quarterback, and he did win also at Arizona. He went his final years at Arizona. He went 1-11, 5-7, and 10-3, right? So if they see the same projection at Washington, the Husky fans will be pretty thrilled. Next up, Michigan State's Jonathan Smith. They went 3-6 for a 33% win rate in conference. His comps are kind of a mixed bag. Versus the prior 5 years that included Mel Tucker, that had a great year and then a really down year. Either way, he's 9 percentage points worse than that. And then versus the prior 15 years that included a 59% win rate, and that included the Mark D'Antonio era, right? 13 years at Michigan State. So this is not an easy comp. He's 25 percentage points worse than that 15-year win rate. So really pretty tough thing here. Got to give him a D, right? Didn't make a bowl. Way too early to judge. Similar to a Jed Fish at Oregon State, he won 48% of his games, but his final 2 years, he went 10-3 and 8-4, right? So he shows he can build a winner that offers hope for Michigan State fans. Next up, UCLA's Deshaun Foster. So Chip Kelly, surprisingly, of course, left UCLA February of 2024, just a little over a year ago, took the offensive coordinator job at Ohio State. No prior head coaching experience. What did UCLA do? They hired the guy with no experience, right? Ask Ohio State basketball fans what they're thinking about that right now. It's risky, but it still can work out, right? He did have one of the toughest schedules in the Big Ten, I can tell you that. UCLA finished 3-6. That's a 33% win rate. That is 20 percentage points worse than the prior 5 years that Chip Kelly had. Chip Kelly was 53% win rate, and I believe Kelly was coached there all 5 years. JR, can you confirm that? You think he was off the prior?
I think he started in 19 or 18, so he's probably close. I'll look it up really fast. You keep going.
Yeah. And then the prior 15 years, UCLA is looking at basically winning half their Pac-10 games. They were winning at a 49% rate. So really, Foster definitely, in order to compare to previous UCLA coaches, he needs to go about 500 in conference, right? If he did that, relatively speaking, that would be pretty good. On the positive side, they got out to a 1-5 start, but that team, I watched them. I mean, they played hard. They did not give up on their coach. So they're playing hard for their coach. They finished 4-2, and actually could have had a chance to maybe even make a bowl game there. So it is a risk to hire him, but you're not going to judge him too much. He needs a couple years to truly judge him. And then finally, Luke Fickell, the home run hire of the cycle 3 years ago, the consensus #1 coaching hire by everyone. Look it up. You could get any preseason magazine, and through 2 years, he's 8-10 in conference, 44% win rate. That's really bad because prior Wisconsin coaches have been pretty damn good. So before he came aboard, even though Paul Chryst had a pretty bad last couple years, they were still winning at a 60% win rate. And then the prior 15 years, 69% win rate for Wisconsin. This is a winning program. Fickle, one of the years was still in the Big Ten West, so his numbers are way down. Wisconsin did not make a bowl for the first time in 22 straight seasons. So not only was the bowl streak broken, their 22 consecutive years of having winning season was broken. And of course, he took the risk hiring Phil Longo, going to an air raid offense that was really against Wisconsin's culture and kind of what they had built. It was a disaster. Now Jeff Grimes has been hired as the new OC. Wisconsin's being patient. I give them credit, but Fickle needs to right things. And just kind of a crazy number. The prior 3 Wisconsin coaches, and this is overall records, Chryst, Anderson, and Bielema in their first 2 years at Wisconsin were 61-18. They won at a 77% win rate, the 3 prior coaches. And Fickle right now is under 500. By any definition, I have to give him an F. So that's it.
Yeah.
7 of 18 only get really good grades. 11 will get bad grades or question marks, I'll say, JR. What are your comments on our DNFs?
Yeah, I think Luke Fickle, unquestionable F. I mean, I know there's like some factors there with NIL and the way things have changed. They're not in the Big Ten West anymore, but I mean, the drop off, what'd you say, 61-18? Like, geez, for him to not even really be close to that. Yeah, that's really horrible. There's no other way to put it. Deshaun Foster, yeah, really tough schedule this year, but I mean, they had some good performances here and there, but I can't get it out of my mind how they struggle with Hawaii and Fresno State. I would have felt better about the season if they would have ended by maybe not outright dominating Fresno State, but winning by more and kind of pulling away there in the end. And I mean, credit to them, they won both those games, but still, that was not as much as I would have liked to see. But it is Deshaun Foster's very first head coaching job. He'll grow. He'll continue to get better. He has Tino Sinceri this year. To me, that's kind of boom or bust. Bringing him in, I think it's more likely boom than bust. But still, 2 young guys getting there should be interesting to see what they can do. Jonathan Smith, it was just such a tough situation for him coming in. Mel Tucker basically buried that program. Mark D'Antonio brought that program up to some of its highest heights, and then Mel Tucker, he found one magical running back and things went well, and then he just completely buried it. So, I mean, right now, Jonathan Smith's just trying to resurrect it. So you look at the 15-year and stuff like that. A lot of these guys down here, they experienced, a good 15 years, but the last 5 years not been as good, right? You're looking at Matt Rule, Jonathan Smith, Jed Fish, stuff like. Well, I guess not Jed Fish because Kalen DeBoer was there, but Kalen DeBoer was only there what 2 years? I think it was.
Yeah,
Um,
2 or 3.
yeah,
I want to
yeah.
say.
Oh, and I did check. Chip Kelly did start at UCLA in 2018, so he was
Yeah,
there for
yeah,
6 years.
yeah,
So
yeah.
he was all of the five
He's
years,
a
but
500 guy, basically.
pretty much. His first year was like 3-9 or something like that, so he didn't go very well. So, um, yeah, and then Jed Fish, he's still getting his feet under him there. He lost a lot of talent. I was concerned with how much talent he didn't bring with him from Arizona. That's why I love the hire in the first place for him. I thought he was going to bring more talent with him from Arizona, and he just wasn't able to do so. He's getting some of that talent now. The cornerback Davis, and I think they have another guy coming in. I can't remember his name, but so they are getting some of that talent now. But you would have liked to see that talent come with them the very first year, considering how much talent they lost to the NFL. And then Matt Rule, I have to say, I think I'd probably go higher than a D plus for him, just because what they were able to do this last year. Started off the season really well. They kind of fell off there toward the end, and then they get the wins. They get the win against Wisconsin there at the end of the year to get them to a bowl game, and then they win their bowl game against Boston College. The change to Dana Holgerson, some of that staff decision stuff doesn't really get reflected in these numbers here as much, but I think that's important to look at as well. And I think, for Matt Rule to be willing to go away from Marcus Satterfield in the beginning of the season to find Dana Holgerson, bring him in, and let him start calling the offense for you. I think that's a pro move as a head coach. I don't think that's something that Deshaun Foster could do. I don't think that's something that Sharon Moore can do. And that's nothing against those guys. It's just they're in their very first year as a head coach. Matt Rule is experienced. It's only his second year at Nebraska, but he's still experienced. He's still somebody that knows what he's doing and can find that kind of stuff. So those are my thoughts.
Yeah, and Jared, you bring up a good thing. You're bringing up some intangible factors, right? Like what momentum, like hiring a good coordinator or something and kind of positioning yourself strong for the future. Yeah, none of that is in here, right? This is just purely based on the numbers. So, but I love getting into that, right? Like, because if you brought that in, it would certainly change the grades, right? And of course, the problem with this data is sample size, but that's okay. It is what I mean, your record is what your record is. Matt Rule is
Right.
6-12 right now, and no one would say that's good, right? But you don't think, oh, he's a bad coach. He doesn't know what he's doing, right? So,
Right.
yeah, good stuff, man.
Yeah. All right. Anything else you want to get to with these numbers before we get out of here?
No, other than just say again, that table and a full write-up is on my site, bigjeffsfootball.com. Go into the blog section, you'll see it all. Next week, we're going to talk recruiting. I'm going to be looking at 5 years of data for all the Big Ten teams, and we're also going to compare to the SEC and how are Big Ten recruiting versus the SEC, and is the Big Ten closing the gap at all? That's for next week.
Yep. Yeah, Jack and I looked at that a little bit, but I think we'll go a little bit deeper dive into that, and that'll be interesting to talk about. Like Jeff said, go visit bigjeffsfootball.com. Follow him on X at Big Jeff's Football or FT Ball as well. Really appreciate Jeff being here. This is what you'll find on Thursday nights. Me and Jeff. It's going to be not so much like me and Zach. A lot more kind of Jeff's content, and we just want to have him highlight his articles, his material, because I really like the stuff Jeff puts out, and I think he thinks of the Big Ten in a good way. And he's a little different than Zach and I, right? Zach and I are so focused on Big Ten, SEC, and all this stuff. And, Jeff kind of comes at it from a little bit of a different angle, and I appreciate that. So I think it's going to be a good addition to the podcasting platform. We're excited, Jeff.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks. And by the way, we do plan to try to get this to under an hour, more like 45 minutes. But this comes from learning, okay, here's how much content leads into that. So we'll get better at that, because I know when I have my podcast, I do like to have them a little under an hour as well, or 45 minutes. So thank you very much, Jared.
Of course, and look, we started with John Madden and Ron Burgundy comparisons, and Husker wants to end with complimenting my haircut one more time. A spiffy cut, I appreciate it there, Husker. My wife did not cut it. My wife will not cut my hair for some reason. She doesn't want to do that, so I go to Great Clips or Sports Clips or really whatever I can check online, and there's nobody there, and they cut it for me. So. All right, we appreciate it, everybody. You can check me and Kevin from Bruin Source tonight, coming to you after the Michigan basketball game in the NCAA tournament. We will recap all the Big Ten games. We'll talk about other games. You had the upset over Clemson and stuff like that today. Not as many upsets as maybe there have been in the past. So Drake got the win over Missouri earlier. We'll talk about that. Kansas goes down to John Calipari in the Arkansas Razorbacks. So if you're a basketball fan, check us out over there. Big Ten After Dark on the basketball channel. That link is in the description. You can find it there. Thanks so much for joining us, everybody. Have a good one.